Welcome to the Progressive Women's Leadership Podcast, where our mission is to advance the women's leadership movement in a way that is empowering, supportive, and bold. My name is Mike Brown, and I will be your host. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Progressive Women's Leadership Podcast. Today's guest is Pernilla Spears Lopez. Pernilla has held the position as President and CEO of IKEA North America, Global Chief HR Officer, and was a member of the executive management team of the IKEA Group for 10 years. Today, Pernilla, with her daughter, is the co-founder of The Good Life Designed and the author of Design Your Life, has a special passion for Save the Children US and International, where she is currently on the board of directors. Pernilla, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's fantastic to have you here. You have such a great background and so many great stories to tell.
Well, I love telling stories, and I'm very passionate about your topic and what you're doing, so it's a pleasure.
Outstanding. So I was doing a little research on you. There are so many things to dive into, but one of the first things that I want to talk about is early in your career. There was a Wall Street Journal article that I was reading where it said that in the beginning of your career, I think it was at the age of 23, you leased a car and drove more than 60,000 miles in 2 years selling Danish furnishings out of your car. Is that true?
That is true. It's one of I would say 2.5 years of my life where I probably learned the most, and at the time was probably the most frustrated. But I think that is what growing up is all about.
So when you say learn the most, what would be an example of something you learned through that process?
Well, if I can just kind of back up a little bit just to give it some context, I grew up in Denmark, and I moved to the United States at the age of 23, actually with this company. I graduated as a journalist in Denmark, and after a year realized that this was at that time for sure not for me. I was way too young, too inexperienced, and the competition was just so hard. And I always had this wish to explore the world outside Denmark, and had a passion for design and had been in the U.S. and thought, well, I think the Danish design would just be very much appreciated in the U.S. It's a great market, and why don't I, kind of embark on that. And it was a great opportunity for me to actually come to the U.S. I had a friend that started the Danish company, and we would export, and then I would go to the U.S. and import, and then be a wholesaler for Danish design, and moved over, and what a great opportunity to come to the U.S. And I only had my brother and my Danish values and a container of some stuff and a business license and a visa and a distant family member. And I landed in Fort Lauderdale and started this business there. And I just realized that at that time there was not really much. There was no internet. There was no cell phones. There wasn't really. It was about really going out and doing your work by meeting people and looking up in the phone book and that kind of stuff. So I literally embarked on finding customers in Florida, and the only way to really do that was just get in your car and meet everybody. And I did that for 2.5 years. I literally drove and met every gift shop, every design shop, every art shop. Went to a couple of big shows in Atlanta and some other places. And what did I learn from that? I learned, first of all, that, I don't regret what I did. What I know now is, of course, I was not very experienced. I didn't do all the research. I just jumped in with both, feet, and got, money from family and friends to, kind of put my dream into action. And all that I think was, of course, I would probably do differently today. But I think it was a great experience. And what I learned is, first of all, I was kind of brave enough to say at that time that, yes, I went to journalist school, but it wasn't for me, and not be afraid of trying something else. And then trying something else that I really had no idea. I mean, I left my family, everybody in Denmark, and went to the U.S. really with just the few things I shared with you. And it was all good. I mean, I didn't succeed after 2.5 years. I went and asked one of my customers who had said that he would at any time give me a job whenever I needed a real job. And I took him up on that one day. But for those 2.5 years, I got to meet so many people. I learned to live in America. I learned a lot about business and rolling up your sleeves and never give up. And also I learned that sometimes you have to give up when there's just nowhere else to go. The right thing is to stop, rethink, and start something else. So I learned an incredible amount of things about myself, about business, about living in America. And then I started understanding what the importance of networks and never burn any bridges. And the list goes on. I could speak for, but those are things that I've taken away from it.
So we have women from all ages listening to the show. So if there were women in their 20s, their early 20s, and they had opportunities in front of them. They're trying to figure out which path, that fork in the road. And one of them's a little riskier, one of them's a little safer. How would you give them guidance on how to make that decision?
I think number one is nothing that you're going to do is going to be easy. And I think the great things in life come from taking risk and also really ups and downs and hard work. So I think the few people are the ones that you read about that just became millionaires overnight or achieved their dream with really, sort of in an easy way. So I think the truth is that being happy and do what you really want to do is hard work. And you're going to have some things along the way that are going to go right and some things that are not going to go right. And it's all about kind of figuring out along the way, when do I need to kind of pull back and then when do I need to push forward? And I think the key is to have some sort of idea of where it is that you want to go. And then look at the two options and say, which of these options are actually getting me in towards that direction? It doesn't mean that you're going to reach that goal in 5 years, but if I'm working towards wanting to one day be independent, or if I really want to work on being a high level in an organization, whatever it is that you're kind of long-term looking at, I think you look at these two options and say, which one is probably the one that will get me there? And then also, we are too worried about success rather than failure. And what I mean about that is I can go back in my life and say, it was not when I was successful that I learned the most. I learned the most when I was failing, because it really kind of got me to think hard about, okay, what do I need to do? And what did I learn from this failure? And what will I do now? And it sort of energizes you and, you get motivated and you have the fire held to you. So if you have two options, one is more risky than the other. Don't be afraid of taking risk, but also don't make shortcuts. And I think looking at risk is not, in my view, that big of a problem. Sometimes you need to take a risk to move ahead and really get further along. But sometimes it could be to take a sidestep. That might be something that's not that exciting, but it's going to get you more experience to actually then do some bigger jumps down the road. So I think you have to really look at what is it that you're trying to do long term, and are you trying to make a shortcut and not really go through the pain of risking something, or maybe not make a lot of money the next 2 years, or it's a little inconvenient. Every time you overcome something that's a little bit of a challenge is really when you learn the most. And certainly don't be afraid of taking risks. And I don't mean huge risk that's going to jeopardize, important things in your life. But, I think some risk is good and it keeps you on your toes.
It sounds like the pain that you had went through in that 2 years is really what shaped you. And it really what created a lot of your work ethic. It created a lot of the direction that you went. There's no way you could see how connect those dots back from then. But looking backwards from the conversations we've had, it seems that is one of the key elements in your life that shaped you.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, just the whole value of writing the book was going back in these times in my life where, there's many times where I was struggling. I mean, yes, did I have a great career? Yeah, absolutely. But I also had many, many times in my life where, of course, see so many things around the world where I have been very fortunate in so many ways, but it's all relative. And in my life, there was things where I personally struggled with a number of things, both as a young, a 13-year-old, going through journalism school, way too young, coming to America and doing this for 2.5 years and have to, pack up and start over, and moving to California without knowing anybody and starting with a new company. When I met my husband and we had kids, we moved to Pittsburgh, where I took my first store manager job and had no friends, nobody, didn't know what I was doing. My husband and I didn't even know how to be married. And we came to Pittsburgh without an infrastructure or support family, nobody. And here we were, just kind of starting as a family with a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old, and growing, as a family and trying to balance with being a mom and traveling. And I had anxiety attacks and was taken to hospitals. And I make it sound like that happened all the time. That was one time. But I just think that we have struggled in our marriage. So life is just not a straight line from A to B, and it's, A is the starting point and B is success. It is a lot of ups and downs in between, and I think it's having that kind of knowledge, and if I could, I just wish that more people could, kind of take from that. If you have struggled, it's good. And know that you have a whole life, and that these experiences are forming you, and they're preparing you for something that comes ahead. And it's just all building character, and it's all building your strength, and it's making you more robust to handle what comes at you.
It's great guidance. One of the things I want to follow up with is you said that if you were to redo that 2.5 years, you would make some different changes. What would you have done differently?
Well, I coach a couple of startup companies now, and really enjoy that. And of course, what I think is important and what I would have done, I think it's, you have to do a little more, I would say, due diligence and some more research. And for example, I mean, if I had done a little more research about this business as I was jumping into, I wouldn't have started in Florida. I mean, as you can imagine, Danish design, 25 years or almost 30 years ago, Danish design was just not on the radar in Florida, and I was trying to sell some fantastic Danish outdoor furniture that happened to be made out of solid wood. Now, anybody that lives in Florida would know that that is the worst product you could sell because it just rots, and so I didn't do all the research, and also design, I think at the time in Florida, it was for sure 10 years behind New York, LA, and all that. And also don't do business with, it's difficult to do business with family and friends. And I mixed that all up and lost that friendship for a number of years. We're back being friends. But again, those are just lessons that I've taken forward. I would still do it again. And I think anybody that's an entrepreneur today and starting business as a young person, the best thing you can do is have someone that is in a different part of their life to be your advisor. And I really enjoy being an advisor for these new young entrepreneurs and not kill their ideas, but just give them some of my insights and challenge them on how fast they go. And, that it's not just about getting started. It's also about sustaining. Starting is maybe not the biggest thing. Sustaining is much more difficult.
It's really interesting the way you're describing the story. It's very there's a lot of adrenaline in it. Almost. I have a daughter in college, and I almost want to see her go through 2 years right out of college where she struggles, so that she can create that framework. But it's so hard to want to embrace something like that. But I'm inspired by the story. Let's fast forward a little bit. And we'll go to IKEA now. And let's take it when you were more of a middle manager. You weren't quite yet at the executive level. Can you talk about some of the challenges you experienced at that point in your career?
So if I kind of talk about it in terms of when I started with IKEA, I was in California, and I was certainly I wouldn't say entry level, but sort of middle management. And when I came to IKEA, I was very excited. I had gained in between my company that I closed and I got into the retail business. And I think I had some really good experience coming into IKEA in 1990. And I was that middle manager, just married. And very quickly did I realize that I definitely wanted to be a store manager, that was really the right thing for me to do. And I worked hard with my boss on coming up with a plan for that. And it was interesting because I could just tell that he didn't believe in me. And for a long time, tried to figure out, what was wrong with me and why was this not going to happen, and maybe I wasn't good enough. And it really came down to that he just did not believe in me. And it was interesting because then a gentleman from the East Coast had heard that I wanted to be a store manager, and he called me and said, I have 2 stores that I would like to offer you. And I was just so shocked and also so excited. And he said, you have a choice between Houston and Pittsburgh. And just the fact that he believed in me, and that was really a sort of a game changer for me and a life-changing moment. And I can see that coming back in my life, that it's so important to, when you work for someone that doesn't believe in you, then it just creates a really tough situation. You start questioning yourself. And so he taught me very quickly that it's not that there was a lot of things I could do better with my boss at the time, no question. And I took a lot of his feedback, but there was something I could tell was not going to work. And so when I got this new job and my family, we moved to Pittsburgh and I became the store manager, just the way he supported me in tough times, in good times, he was just always there. And I would say, coming to Pittsburgh as a young mom and a husband that was in education, and he lost his certification when we moved from California. He was a teacher and a coach, and when we came to Pittsburgh, he had to go back to school, and we had a 5 months and a 2-year-old, and as I said, very kind of exciting, but also challenging for us as a family. And then I was there was really no female store managers. There was one other in the whole U.S. organization, and I think there was no women really above me or in senior management. And so trying to figure out how to be a mom, try to run this store. And I had a lot of, this was a store that was doing terrible. So I probably took over the worst IKEA store in the world. It was about to close, and it was my job to turn it around. And of course, I'd never been a store manager. So challenges just in every aspect. At the same time, I was just so excited about it. And I learned that the people in that store, of course, looked at me and said, they knew that the store was almost going to close. And so they looked to me, but then at the same time, they're like, what kind of experience does she have to turn this around? And what that led to was that I had nothing else than use the employees and use their knowledge, because they knew about that market. And that I learned the power and the importance of being close to your employees and to the people on the floor, and then be a team. And together we actually turned that store around, and it was just an incredible experience. Along the way, I also realized this was not an easy place to be a mom, or especially for the hourly employees, where we just schedule them at this time, and if they're late 3 times, they're fired. And so I really realized that for young families or families that work on an hourly rate, to try to make their lives come together is a huge challenge. And so I became a real, passionate about how can we make better conditions and better working environment and policies that support families, because people loved IKEA. And that got me very involved in women in leadership and working parents and working families. And before I knew it, I was the HR manager for North America. And that was probably, I would say, the toughest job I ever had was really that job as HR for North America, because I took that job commuting between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, where the headquarters of IKEA is. And I took that job because I was so passionate about what we needed to do for the employees. And I was successful in many ways in putting out the agenda and a new strategy. But personally, it was I was the only woman among 12 men. And I always felt like they were 12 angry men because they challenged me on everything. And I just took I think I took all employees' problems on my shoulders. And I was about diversity, about women, about learning and development and better benefits and so forth. And I got myself an anxiety attack and thought I was going to die. And that became a really important experience because, it wasn't about IKEA. It was how I approached my job. And so I took a couple of years to accept this anxiety attack, accept the way I was working was just not healthy. And it wasn't about the hours or anything else. It was just about how I took everything so much in and was not able to kind of talk myself in a good way to be more kind of not hands off, but create some space between, the inner me and IKEA. And that prepared me really for being, the president of IKEA North America, because that was a much more challenging from a job perspective, but I was able to handle it myself, I think, in a better way. I don't know if that answer, it was a very long answer.
It's a great answer, but I have so many follow-up questions.
Okay.
All right, so I want to go back to the job where the boss did not believe in you. So you're in a situation and you get the vibe, and I'm sure there's people listening right now who are dealing with the same issue. They have someone that they feel doesn't believe in them. What type of guidance could you give that person right now?
Yeah, I think it has to do a little bit with the situation. And I can tell you, I have my own kids are struggling with this in their new jobs or change jobs. So I think that the thing is that there are times where we will have a boss that is not the right boss for us. And sometimes you just have a bad boss. You don't always select the right. And I think it depends on if you've only been in your job for 3 months and you don't get along with your boss, it might be worthwhile to just kind of know that it's not the long-term solution, but that you want to get some experience under your belt. You got to just figure out how to not panic and just leave or make, sort of quick decisions and give up. So there's always something you can learn from that. You can always learn about how to communicate with that person better, etc. So I would say make kind of a little bit of an assessment of where you are and how long is this really something that you can handle. And then I think it is so important to look at what is your exit strategy. What is it that you want to do? Because at some point, if it is so bad that it is really emotionally and physically hurting you, just how you feel about going to work and you become sick and all that, then there's no job that's really worth that. But at the same time, you are learning from having a difficult relationship. And then I think the key is when you look for a new job, as much as you want the job, make sure that your boss is the person that you want to work for, and also that the company has the culture that you want to live within. So I would say there's different things you need to look at going into a new job. Then, of course, there are situations where you do have a boss that comes in a job. He or she comes in as your new boss, and you had no say in that. Do the best to get along and figure out how to work with a different kind of person. Give it some time. Challenge yourself. And if it doesn't work, absolutely, you got to move on.
So I think the strongest thing you're saying there is don't be a victim. If the situation is, there's some people you just can't change, and you need to figure out what you call the exit strategy, whether it's internal or external, and not to be a victim.
Absolutely. And I've used this, and I hope this can help, is that when there's a change or when there's a situation, you really only have 3 options. One is to change it, accept it, or leave. To not do any of those 3 things is just a disaster because you end up being physically not well and your performance will go down. You'll lose interest in not only your job, but also in everything around you. And you become that victim. So these 3 tactics, you could say, are all you taking control. Because if you can change it, do it. If you can't, accept it. That's your choice. You respond to it by accepting it. Or you decide to just leave. And I think those are always the three good things to evaluate in any kind of situation.
So now we fast forward a little bit when you started in Pittsburgh, and I was drawn to what you were saying about how it was tough to be a mom in the building at that company. And you said that you made some changes to help. I'm curious what some of those changes were. What were the most positive ones that had impact on the culture?
Well, I think, first of all, when I came to Pittsburgh, I realized that in retail, you might not have a lot of female store managers, but I would say in most retail, 50%, if not more, of the staff are women and often working moms. And so I think there are definitely a lot of women out there working. And what I thought was interesting is that there was sort of this idea that women, because we're moms, can't be store managers, and retail is not the right place for you to be a store manager if you also are a mom. So we were a lot of women in that store, and some of the women were struggling because they actually they didn't have anybody they could talk freely about. And I think a couple of women were so relieved that they even had somebody to talk about. So an example would be, I had a woman that, her daughter was, I think, in middle school, and the daughter would get ear infections in the winter, and she was so stressed out over this coming a couple of times in the winter, and that they would call from the school and they would call and tell her that her daughter needed to go to the doctor, and that, and this woman was so terrified of coming and asking if she could leave. And I think in a lot of companies, it is so difficult for women and I'm sure men too, that are your kids are your priority. And so what we talked about is that, but of course, you're a manager. Go and pick up your daughter. Go and do what you need to do. If you want to come back, you come back. And if not, you just take a sick day, or you take another day off, or whatever. Let's work around this. I'll cover your shift, and so forth. And I mean, it was unbelievable. Another woman had been scheduled at certain times, and it was 15 minutes after she would drop her kids off, and she was always late. And so we talked about, well, there was no real need for her to be there at 8 o'clock. Why don't we just say you come in at 8:30, and changed her schedule? And it was just unbelievable, the stress that these people felt. But when you just talk it through with each individual, you don't have to make changes for everybody. But if everybody can take ownership for their life balance, and the company is willing to work with people, obviously it's always about the business, but I don't think there's ever really a conflict between running a good business and having employees that feel that they can also live a life, and when they are comfortable that their children are in good hands and that they can attend to that, then they will be much more committed to the business. And that was my really big aha. And I realized that I could be an advocate for women being store manager, and wanted to see more women become store managers, because that's the key job to succeed in the company. If you haven't been a store manager, you are limited. And I found out myself that being a store manager as a woman, I actually had more flexibility. I could take my kids to school and be with them in the morning, and then I had to work at night. But then my husband was at home. Or when I worked on Saturdays, that was a great day for him. And then we were together maybe on Sunday. And times I had a whole day by myself at home when the kids were in school, when I was off during the week, and the list goes on. So I think it was such a real close life experience that I think formed my passion for developing benefits and culture for families, really not only sort of surviving in their everyday and doing what is important to them, but also have a career and continue your career even if you have small kids. It's not a problem. On the contrary.
So if I had sort of take that back a step and to give guidance to some others, I think what you really did there was you made it safe to have the work-life conversations. And then people, once they felt safe having them, they were able, and you showed them that it was okay to do these things or to say these things. They had more loyalty to you and wanted the company to succeed even more. So providing that safe environment was great for the culture and great for the business.
Absolutely. I mean, I cannot say how much I am a believer in that. Employees come to work every day to want to do a good job. And I think they also know that a good, successful business benefits them, and they want to participate and be part of making the business successful. And I think as managers and leaders and as a company culture, we all need to sort of appreciate each other. And I do think leadership has a huge responsibility in creating a culture and environment where it's safe to talk about these things. And the benefit is just, I think, is completely overwhelming. And I thought we had all these, of course, when I then became HR manager for North America, we had all these work groups around. At that time, it was called work-life policies and so forth. And I remember we had so many frontline supervisors, moms, dads, and warehouse supervisors and all parts in the organization. And we thought that when we put up, what is it that you would like to, for your life to be easier? We thought they would come up with all these big, huge, more money, more benefits, etc. 90% of it was changes in schedules, being more flexible, and just have somebody to talk to and feel that it was okay to have conversations. And when they call from school and your daughter is sick, that everybody rallies around and say, go, and we'll cover for you and not be penalized. And of course, yeah, there's some people that are going to, take advantage of that. But that is 1% out of, 100. So that's my experience.
Sounds like it worked out really well there. Connecting a couple dots, when you were describing your experience when you were the HR manager and you were only one woman on a team of 13, and there was a lot of, it seemed like some struggles there and some tough times, and I think you talked about the anxiety, and then you transitioned that to that you figured out how to deal with that, and that's what positioned you well to be the president. It almost, when I go back, it almost feels a little bit like the 2.5 years that you spent in the car going through and struggling, and the strength that created and how you figured out how to transition to the next stage. Am I connecting dots?
Yeah, I think surviving it, I think everything kind of builds up to when you're able to take on something new, that everything that you've done has in some sort of way prepared you. So, building a confidence that no matter what, I'm okay and I will be okay. So I don't really have too much to risk. So when I was often in that management group and presented things that were always controversial. I mean, HR, I think anybody that's been in HR, there's always the question about why are we spending too much money on the employees, or do we really need this? And so there's always this really tough financial question, and do we really need this? And I was often just standing there by myself as the only woman and addressing these kind of questions. And I don't want to make it sound like I never got support or anything, but often it felt like a really lonely kind of place. And I just remember, thinking that, okay, I'm just going to listen and I'm just going to keep on going. I'm just going to take in what I'm hearing, but I'm not going to give up. And I guess what was the difference is that even if I didn't feel good afterwards, I didn't let it go so deep that I lost my complete confidence. And I think that is that. So there is some sort of grounding. And when I was president, often also in the top managed executive team, or even stuff I do today, there are times where you feel like you're the only one that's bringing up something, or people aren't hearing you. And then I just have to make sure that I don't completely derail myself and start, questioning who I am. I make an inventory. I'm like, I am here for a reason, and I am here. I have a job to do, and it's my job to keep on moving forward. I have to listen to feedback. I have to sometimes change, but I cannot lose confidence in that I'm here for a reason. And I am just as good and as smart as everybody else. I might be different, but I am here, and I am not going to not use that space to do what I'm supposed to do. And I think that is something that has built over time. Was it the failed journalist? Was it, was it the 60,000 miles in my car? Was it the, different jobs in retail, starting selling furniture at $5 an hour? Was it the Pittsburgh? I don't know. I think it all builds on that. We are building an inventory of competences, and when you're in doubt and when you start telling yourself, I really don't deserve to be here, they are much smarter than me, you say to yourself, okay, let me just stop for a moment and say, I am here because, and then list yourself the reasons that you got this job or why you have a seat at the table.
It's a very good transition to the next topic, which is one you talk about in your book, and almost the flip side of that, which is the stories we tell ourselves that hold us back. And many, many times, and in your book, especially women you talk about, hold themselves back because there are stories that they have heard from, whether it be a parent or a teacher or a colleague or a boss or something that is stuck, and that story holds us back. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I can speak about it from my own experience, from working with a lot of people for many, many years, and then also what I know about how we are wired differently than men. So, I have my entire life probably lived a little bit with I have always been worried. I've always been a little bit anxious. And I remember my mom always says, why are you always so worried? And I think I was always in my head thinking the worst is going to happen. And I wasn't really aware of it. My mind would just go, places where, sometimes it made me very anxious. And, so I think that's typical for kids. It's also, I think, specifically typical for women. And whenever I got a job, I always thought to myself, I wonder if they'll ever find out I don't know what I'm doing. And so there was always this, like, I am not good enough. And I realized that storytelling really wasn't serving me or anybody else, and it would create an unnecessary problem and kind of like anxiety. And I think the work that I started doing with addressing that actually happened after I had my anxiety attack, and I started, really doing a lot of journaling, meditation, reflecting, and sort of self-coaching, reading a lot of books and so forth. So I am aware of the stories that go on in my head, and I am getting better at changing my story and changing from shrinking to expanding, from feeling small to feeling important or valuable, and shifting when I'm thinking about something in a certain way and it's sort of going in that negative. How can I turn that around and say, is it really that way, or is that your perception? So it is a skill. I actually think it's not something you can just do. It took me a number of years. So that's my experience. The other experience I can say is that I worked with a program with IKEA where I invited 16 top managers into a program called I and IKEA. I couldn't understand why most women that had achieved a pretty good job, they were our senior managers in the U.S. organization of women, why would they still see that there was no other way they can go? This was like all this is it, that's all I can do. And how did they put that bar so clear? So we created this program, and we met for a couple, it was the first part was a year where we met every 6 weeks from Tuesday at lunch to Thursday at lunch. And the program was designed to really explore like what is holding me back, and then what does that mean in terms of what can I do more at IKEA and how can I move my career forward. And I have to say, we never really got the first year to IKEA because it was so incredible, the kind of stuff that these women were dealing with and the stories they had told themselves and how limited sort of they had become. And the work became about changing that story and helping them see themselves in a different way. So thirdly, I also think that we're just wired differently. And I know that part of how we're wired is that we are very good we can certainly multitask. We have that capability, and that means we often do a lot of things at once. And even when our brain is at rest, so a lot of thoughts go on in women's head all the time. And I think a lot of it is our thoughts also related to our emotions. So very quickly can your head and your thinking become so overwhelming. And then we tend to tell the story that is, we're not good enough and we don't deserve to be happy. And it's probably because, it's my fault if something doesn't go right. So we don't become really skilled in actually coaching ourselves to shift our thinking into more constructive, not victim, but, I have power. I can change. I have a lot of things I'm offering, and just keep on building your own story and be able to stop that negative train. So that's my view on it. And I think it's very tough for women. And I do retreats, I do mentoring, and I think most of that comes in the conversation is that it is just how can I help you tell your story differently? How can you tell yourself your story differently? How can you shift what happened into a different way where you take some responsibility, but then you also don't, kind of ruminate over it and you just move on. And it takes time. It takes work.
So if there was someone listening today who, and I do hear the same when people say that it is my fault if something doesn't go right, when yes, there is some accountability, but there's a ton of other accountability to go around. And if that becomes a pattern, what are some early steps that people can say, one, to recognize it, and two, to start the process of moving and shifting and reframing?
So first of all, I think one of the biggest tools for me, and I think it's actually quite difficult for most people to do this, but I would say that the one thing that I could say in the last 15 years has been my best friend is my journal. I just write things down. I journal, and I have had many years where I would journal almost every day because I was going through things, and journaling is a way to get everything out. It's like downloading your computer. And when you have downloaded it, it's actually easier to take a look at it and say, okay, so what's really going on? So I think journaling is one. A friend of mine taught me to look at the X and Y, and what he was saying is that the X is what is the fact, what really happened, and then Y is my interpretation. And so with anything happening, I think it's a good way to look at what is really the fact, what actually happened, and then how have I interpreted that, and is that an interpretation that could I shift that? Could I change that? And of course you can, because it's your interpretation. So I think those are some very good steps. I also think I know I've mentioned that to you. I am such a believer in mentoring, and I would say I've even come to understand over the last few years that there is a lot of confusion about mentoring, but I do believe that every one of us need to have someone in our lives that is not our parents, it's not our spouse, it's not our children, it's not our best friends, it's someone in your life that you really trust and that you feel you can have a complete, open, honest conversation with, and that might be older than you, that have been, sort of as a little ahead of you in life experience, that you can kind of run things by, and that can say, have you thought about it this way? So I do think that there is absolutely ways you can work with this, but it's hard work. I have a very good friend. We've been friends for many years, and I would say the last 8-9 years, we have worked together on getting her to not immediately go to the negative, the small, insignificant, to I can change this. I can look at this in a different way. I can take charge, and it's very hard for her. So I don't take it lightly. That telling that story differently it has been formed for a number of years. I mean, for many of us, a lifetime. So to suddenly start telling yourself another story sounds easy, but it's not.
Some good guidance. I want to build on the mentoring conversation. And I know in some of your writing and some of the conversations we've had, you make a distinct difference between coaching and mentoring. And I think some people blend them together. Could you give your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think all of coaching and mentoring, I think, are really so important in both life and work. But that is where it's mostly talked about. I think it's actually almost more important in your private life or in your holistic life, because life is more than just work. And I say one of the sayings in my book is, don't spend your whole life searching for the right job. Make it the most important job to design your right life. And I think so much about mentoring and coaching is about a career or job. And so what I look at is, I think that coaching for me is about coaching to a specific competence or the job. So if I'm a store manager, it's great for me to have a coach, and often it could be your boss. They're coaching you in performing your job. That's what a basketball coach is really coaching the team to get the skills and the teamwork to win. And for me, mentoring is much more about your personal, you as a person, and it's really about your life as a holistic perspective. And that a mentor is someone that you have honest, authentic dialogues with about your life and where you're going. And that mentor is really the person that gets to the essence of what's holding you back for doing what you really want to do. And so for me, mentoring is really, I want to demystify mentoring, because I know there's books written about it. I have a lot of respect for that when you do it in a company, and there are skills that you have. But I think it's also, I think so many people are avoiding getting a mentor because they see or think that it's a high level person, somebody that, they don't deserve. And in the meantime, there's a person right there in their life that could be a mentor for them. And really, you've got to make commitment. You've got to make sure that you talk on a regular basis. You've got to set some plans of what you want to get out of the relationship. So you've got to be a little bit structured. You can't, if you really want it to work. But it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be somebody, at a high level or somebody outside your current network. And I think if every one of us had a mentor in our lives, and that we mentor somebody else, I think we could help each other in moving in a direction of more happy lives.
One last thing to talk about. I know that you are, some of the things you're involved with, I thought you may want to share. I know you're spending much of your time and energy on a variety of boards and talking about diversity on those boards. And maybe there's some things you can share for our audience on that.
Yeah, I think I left IKEA in 2011 and really took a year off and kind of wanted to know, how do I want to design my own life now? And I have to say, it certainly didn't just show up one day and said, oh, this is what I'm going to do. So it sort of evolved. I'm really, excited that I'm still in the business. I'm on the board of 3 corporations, 2 of them Danish companies. One actually, Echo, is in Echo US. So I'm just joining them and helping them, and on the board here in getting Echo more on the US market. I am on a company called Meyer. I'm out of the Midwest, which is a grocery business and hypermarket, and then also a grocery business in Denmark. And then I'm also doing work with Save the Children. And I did not know that I would really enjoy being a board member, but I think it is that combination of, I feel like I have impact on supporting and challenging the leadership in these organizations from different, certainly with my business background, but I'm certainly always the voice of leadership, the culture of the company, the employees, and certainly diversity. And still, I am in places where I am the only woman, and you think in 2015, is that really still there? And of course it is. And I can see that there's still a lot of work to do. And I feel like I have a great role to play, and they know that when they get me on the board, that's important to me, and I think they like that I challenge them and continues to want the whole human resources to play a much bigger role in how you operate on a senior level, because you are not a company if you don't have your people. And I think human resources are often numbers. And if I could be part of putting more human into human resources and make it more of a strategic business imperative, then that's what I am there to do. And that includes, having a much broader representation of opinions and experiences at a top level.
Well, Pernilla, this was fantastic. I learned a ton. I'm sure our listeners did. I mean, I made all these notes, and if I had to distill it down to three things that I took away, the first was making it safe to have those work-life conversations. I mean, when I was listening to your story, that seemed to be one of the most impactful things that you had done, and the way you impacted people, and obviously the way you turned around that business. The second is to reframe the stories we tell ourselves. And we all do it. And I like the suggestion of journaling. And I think that there was some good guidance for everyone out there. And the third was the way you described mentoring and the demystifying. And a lot of people, I think you may have put a different perspective out there. And when you use the term, get to what is holding us back, I think that is powerful. And if you think about it that way, it's broader than just your next promotion at your job. It's a much broader experience. Anything else you'd like to share with the audience in the show?
No, I think you summed it up very well. And certainly I am, I think one thing that someone said to me that I probably didn't think about myself is that I think in all aspects in my whole career, I think the one thing that I've always been is very accessible. So I've been the accessible executive. And I think that really is still in what I do now. I do a lot of speaking, I do workshops, I do retreats, and I'm actually just launching a mentoring concept where people can contact me through our website and sign up for a 30-minute mentoring. I really want to be accessible to people that don't have big, all the resources and companies behind them, because I feel that is what I'm about, and want to build a community, and very much like you are, just help people out there that have so much to offer, but in some way feel held back. And then that is the reality. And if they can see that, wow, there's no limit to what I can do, then we have accomplished a lot. So that's my mission.
Do you want to let people know what website that is?
Yeah, please go to goodlifedesign.com and let me know how we can support you. And there will also, in a couple of weeks, we will have the September 24th, we will launch the mentoring idea. And so please contact me at goodlifedesign.com. Or also, I think you can get my book there. And I would love to hear from the audience. So again, wanting to be accessible and certainly happy to share my story and my knowledge.
Well, Pernilla, thank you so much for sharing all this information with the Progressive Women's Leadership Podcast, and really appreciative of all your candor and all the guidance that you provided.
Absolutely, and hope to talk to you again, and wish the best to the audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the podcast. For more information like this, please go to progressivewomensleadership.com.